Nouveauté soviétique, une machine minuscule aux airs de bête curieuse et qu'on dénomme d'ailleurs l'avion canard, qui doit servir au transport de courrier à brève distance. Détail intéressant, étant avion, ce canard n'aime pas l'eau.
Nouveauté américaine, il s'agit naturellement du plus gros hydravion du monde. Sa carlingue, longue de 75 mètres, haute comme une maison de 4 étages, ses ailes de 50 mètres ne passent pas inaperçues. Détail, ce géant emportera 700 passagers, comme un simple train de voyageurs.
Nouveauté française, car il y a des nouveautés françaises. L'hydravion SE-200 dont la construction vient d'être achevée et qui fait ses premiers essais. Ces 6 moteurs emporteront leurs 72 tonnes à 305 km/h en vitesse de croisière. 52 mètres d'envergure, 40 mètres de longueur, 11 mètres de hauteur pour sa coque à 2 ponts. Telles sont les mesures maîtresses de ce géant dont le rayon d'action peut couvrir 7000 km. Les années de guerre n'ont pas servi la production aéronautique française. Cependant, ce paquebot aérien ne fait pas piètre mine devant son cousin d'Amérique. Il est beau, il vole bien et, détail sympathique, il portera des cocardes tricolores.
Terminal Island, California has been the site of a large mysterious hangar that has been off limits to the public since 1947. This hangar houses the world's largest airplane, the Hughes Flying boat. To most people, this legendary aircraft is better known as the Spruce Goose, but Howard Hughes detested this name and referred to it as the HK-1 or the H4 Hercules. This aircraft is the largest ever built, with a wingspan of 320 feet. Its wingtips would extend into the end zones of a football field. The modern 747 jetliner is dwarfed by it, and the Air Force's C-5A seems small by comparison. Now let's go inside the hangar and see the Hughes Flying boat while in storage. This mammoth aircraft was conceived in the early days of World War II, when the German U-boats were taking a heavy toll of Allied shipping. Henry J. Kaiser, the builder of the Liberty ships, proposed building 5,000 of these flying boats to take men and material to the theaters of war. In November of 1942, Howard Hughes and Henry Kaiser formed the Kaiser-Hughes Corporation to build 3 prototypes for $18 million. The War Production Board contract stipulated the aircraft were to be built of non-critical materials, such as wood. Howard Hughes, insisting on perfection, personally directed the engineering and design. The months dragged on into years. Kaiser's only interest had been in mass production, and with the U-boat threat diminished, he withdrew from the project. In March of 1944, with most of the original $18 million spent, the contract was canceled. But at the insistence of Mr. Hughes, a new contract was negotiated for 1 flying boat. Then Howard Hughes pressed on with the design and began construction. Laminated birchwood, which is light and strong, was fastened with special glues and held in place with millions of nails until the glue dried. The only major steel components used on the ship are mounts for these 8 3,000 horsepower R-4360 Pratt & Whitney engines, the most powerful piston aircraft engines ever built. Finally, on June 11, 1946, at Hughes Culver City Aircraft Plant, the world's largest wooden building opened its doors to roll out the massive components of the flying boat. The plan to move the components had begun in 1944. Because of the problems of moving such large objects over the streets, highways, and bridges along the 28-mile route to Terminal Island. Some 2,300 power and telephone lines had to be cut and restored. The trip took 2 days to complete, with thousands of people sometimes lining the route. Even schools were recessed so the children could watch the aircraft's fuselage move by. The planning paid off. Everything went without a hitch. Even the overhead trolley wires of Pacific Electric had to be moved to accommodate the fuselage. Once the components reached Terminal Island, over 300 workers were assigned to the project to assemble the flying boat at the harbor site. While the assembly was underway, Howard Hughes was testing the prototype of his new photo reconnaissance plane, the XF-10. When one of the propellers malfunctioned, the plane crashed while attempting to return to the landing field in Culver City. Howard Hughes was not expected to survive. But he did. And work on the aircraft continued at a feverish pitch until finally on November 1st, 1947, the Hughes Flying boat was ready to leave its dry dock. In addition to the government officials, over 500 reporters, photographers, and newsreel cameramen were on hand for the initial taxi tests in the outer Los Angeles harbor. Expectations grew as to whether Mr. Hughes was going to taxi or fly the giant ship that loomed over the heads of those assembled. Preparations had begun early in the morning to float the massive aircraft in its dry dock so that it could be towed out into the channel. This operation took most of the day. Let's go inside the giant aircraft now and inspect the interior. The airplane is designed to carry 700 fully equipped soldiers. And there's Mr. Hughes now. Let's catch up with him. Mr. Hughes is continuing to deny the rumors that he will attempt to fly the massive aircraft this weekend. He restates he is only going to conduct taxi tests or runs in the outer harbor. Mr. Hughes has selected a crew of 17 men for the test runs, headed by Dave Grant, who is to be co-pilot. Finally, the ship's dry dock is filled, and she is towed out into the channel. But the weather is too rough for the taxi tests to be conducted, so the ship is moored overnight near the dry dock area. The following day, the weather is clear, and Mr. Hughes begins his checkout procedure. We now tune into Jim McNamara for his live on-board commentary.
This is James McNamara speaking to you from aboard the Howard Hughes 2,000-ton flying boat. We have 8 powerful engines on either side of it as the boat begins to rock perceptibly now for the first time as we get into a roll here in the outer harbor. Now we're plowing along at about 50 knots as we can gauge the speed. It feels like we're riding a souped-up ocean liner. Howard, do you have time at this moment to explain for our radio listeners exactly what you're doing?
Yeah, we're now taxiing downwind very slowly to get into position for a run.
Again, the helicopter now is hovering above us. So now, as Mr. Hughes pushes the throttle forward. 50, it's 50 over a choppy sea. It's 55, it's 55. More throttle, it's 60, it bounces to 65, it's 70, it's 75, and something momentarily he cuts out, and I believe we are airborne. We are airborne, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't believe that Howard Hughes meant this to be. I don't know. We were airborne for just a moment, and we were really up in the air. We were really up in the air. And I don't know whether Howard, did you expect that?
Yes, certainly. I like to make surprises.
You were surprised or not?
Oh, I said I thought I'd make a surprise.
That brief flight was Howard Hughes' finest hour. Over the next 17 years, he spent over $35 million on the hangar and improvements to the aircraft. But Howard Hughes never returned to fly it. 33 years later, after the death of Mr. Hughes, the Summa Corporation donated the aircraft to the Aero Club of Southern California, who, in partnership with the Rather Corporation, are moving the ship since the hangar lease has expired. With press from around the world present, the Hughes Flying Boat makes its first public appearance in 33 years. The aircraft was floated earlier and is ready to be pulled out into the channel. It will be picked up later in the day by the world's largest crane, nicknamed Hermann the German, and stored on dry land until it can be placed on permanent exhibition adjacent to the ocean liner Queen Mary in Long Beach Harbor. Congratulations to the Summa Corporation, the Aero Club of Southern California, and the Rather Corporation for their mutual cooperation in preserving the Hughes Flying Boat as a single massive piece of historic aviation technology.